can have an opinion of Gideon, that's fine. But this is about us seeing God and who God is and how God still wants to work and be present in our lives, right? So, in order to understand Gideon, we have to understand a little bit about the book of Judges. And any Bible drill champions, what is before the book of Judges? Joshua. Okay, so Joshua follows Moses. And so Moses leads the people out of slavery in Egypt into the desert. They wander the desert for 40 years. Moses is about to die. He's not going to get to enter the promised land. And he puts Joshua in command of Israel. And Joshua's role is to lead the people into the promised land. So Joshua leads the people into the promised land. Joshua is one of my favorite people in all of the Bible because over and over again in Joshua's life it says Joshua did exactly as the Lord had commanded him. And I think, man, if we could follow Joshua's example like that, and, you know, at the end of Joshua's life, it says, Joshua did everything that Moses was told to do and Moses told him to do and that God told him to do. I'm like, if somebody looked at your leadership or your calling or whatever it was and said, and they did exactly what God told them to do, you'd be like, whew, that's a life well lived, right? And so Joshua, to me, is kind of a hero in the faith because of his faithfulness to God and his leadership. And so we're going to look at a spot in Joshua. We're going to look at Joshua chapter 23 really quickly. And we are going to just kind of see what is happening right in Israel's life right before Judges takes place, okay? Joshua is about to die, and here's what it says. What did I say? Joshua 23, verse 6, okay? It says, "Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. But you are to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day, no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000, because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. But if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your back and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you." Okay, so this is Joshua talking to the people of Israel as he's about to die, and he says, be very careful to do everything that the Lord has commanded you, and if you start to intermingle with the Canaanite people, if anybody needs an outline, my dad has them over here. So if you start to intermingle with the Canaanite people who I have given you, right, who you have taken over, they're going to become a snare for you. It's going to be problems for you. I'm just warning you, basically. God is going to let you fall into that trap if you so desire, and he's not going to protect you anymore. And so Joshua kind of leaves the Israelite people with this. This is like one of Joshua's last charges to Israel. And then Joshua dies, and we get into the book of Judges. And in Judges chapter 1, verses 17 through 36, here's what it says. Then the men of Judah went with the Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, and attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they totally destroyed the city. Therefore, it was called Hormah. Judah also took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, each with its territory. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had chariots fitted with iron. As Moses had promised, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove it from the 3 sons of Anak. The Benjaminites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjaminites. Now the tribes of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. When they sent men to spy out Bethel, formerly called Luz, the spies saw a man coming out of the city and said to them, "Show us how to get into the city." We're going to move down to 26. He then went to the land of the Hittites, where he built the city, which is to this day. All right, anyways. 27. But Manasseh did not drive out the people. Okay, do you see what I'm saying here? Do you see the point of me reading this? What's going on over and over again? They're taking over the people like they were promised they were going to do, but they're not driving them out of the land. And so over and over and over again it says, this tribe had great success in what God promised them, but they didn't drive out the people. And so what's going to happen if they don't drive out the people that Joshua just promised them? They're going to start to become like those people, right? And so we move to Judges chapter 2, verses 1 and 3. And here's what it says. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, "I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you." And so God is now telling the people the same thing. I told you to drive them out. You did not drive them out. And I told you that they're going to become snares for you. Okay, and then we're going to scoot down to verses 10 through 19, and we'll be done with our little introduction to Judges. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and Ashtaroth. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. When Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges, who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. All right, so that's like a summary for what's going to happen throughout the rest of the book of Judges, okay? The Israelite people did not drive out the Canaanite people. And so now they have become like the Canaanite people. And eventually God says, I warned you, I'm leaving you. And as he leaves them, they become conquered. And they whine. And they whine. And you can see in the cycle of sin in Judges. And when they whine, eventually they cry out to the Lord. And then God always raises up a judge for them. And the judge usually saves them or delivers them. And they're excited about it. And they serve the Lord for a little bit. And then when the judge dies, they start the cycle back over again. And if you read the book of Judges, you see this over and over and over again. And it's interesting because as you go through the book of Judges, the judges get worse and worse as Israel gets worse and worse. You start out with some great judges like Deborah, who do amazing things. And then you go to judges like Gideon, who we're going to talk about, who does some good things and then does some questionable things. And then your last judge is Samson. And Samson doesn't even really know anything about God. And he's kind of promiscuous. And his life ends with like this terrible murderous reign for a moment before he dies. And so you kind of see Israel fall further and further into this corruption and fall further and further away from God. And so that is the cycle of Judges, and that's what we're looking at today a little bit. But we're going to talk more about this guy named Gideon, and he starts in Judges chapter 6. All right, so we're going to start with verses 1 through 6. Tell me when you're there. Good? All right. Judges chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. You've heard that before, haven't you? And for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkey. They came up with their livestock in their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So, starts out with a resounding excitement for Israel. It says, Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So they're not starting out real great, huh? And it says that this group of people from the east called the Midianites come in. And I just think this is funny, but the Midianites, their thing that they're known for in warfare was riding camels. So that's why it says you couldn't count them or their camels. That's what made them a great army, was that they would ride camels in. So Israel goes from a people who are trusting their God, and the walls of Jericho are falling down, and they're taking out what looked like giants to the spies and all these things, to now they're falling to camel armies. Okay? And so Midianites come in, and they don't stay in Israel. They like to go back to where they're from. But what they do is every single time Israel plants their crops and they grow and they start to harvest them, Midianites come in, they take everything that Israel has worked for so that they have nothing left, and then they just go back home. And then they wait until the next harvesting season. And they do this for 7 straight years. And it says that they so oppressed the Israelites that they had nothing left. And it says that locusts that was the Midianites. But it says that they were so impoverished that they finally cry out to the Lord. And so there's a few things that I notice here, and sometimes I think I say this every time we do a Bible study, we look at people like the Israelites in these situations, and we go, they're so evil. We're not like them. That's horrible. Obviously, we don't do those things. And I think that we're silly sometimes to just assume ourselves out of situations. We may not be as bad as the Israelites in some situations. Like, hopefully you don't have an altar to a golden calf in your basement somewhere or something like that. But we tend to do similar things over and over again, right? We see God move in amazing ways, and we get excited, and we follow him for a little bit, and then we get into a dry season, and we go, I don't know if God's real. I'm just going to kind of do my own thing and try to figure it out. And this seems to happen over and over and over again. And the reality is that the more that we fall into our sin, God will allow us to go into our disobedience, if that's what we choose. If we so choose disobedience over and over and over again, God will allow it. And we will reap the consequences of those things. And you've probably experienced that in your life in some ways. Different ways that you have started to kind of say, oh, this is just a little sin, and I'm just going to kind of give into it, and it's okay. But that sin starts to grow in your life. And that sin starts to become something that once was just a little thing, and now all of a sudden is something that's really starting to oppress your life and really starting to change the reality of your life and starting to affect everything that you do. And so I think we need to be really careful in thinking that things are little and that they're no big deal and that we can just allow them in our lives, because they grow quickly. And that's always the truth for Israel over and over again. They grow quickly, these little things. And there's something that I think we need to see is that God does two things to Israel in this situation. He chastens them and he disciplines them. Okay? Chasten is something that I think is really interesting. It basically just means he humbles them. He humbles them. And I think this is something that we don't often consider, but one of the sins of Israel is that, man, we're doing a good job. Things are going really well over here. Did you see all the armies we conquered? We don't need to do all that. We already have the city. We've already plundered the city. Why do we need to chase people out of it? They're already scared of us. They're already our servants. We're good to go. And so sometimes God will have to humble us in order to get us to serve him. The other thing that God does is he disciplines. And so when humbling doesn't work, sometimes God will discipline us. And disciplining us sometimes is letting us go into that sin. It's letting the Midianites take them over in this case, right? God will allow us things that we so desire sometimes just to give us the discipline that we need. And that's something that I think is a reality sometimes we don't think of. However, I love what happens here because it says, Midian so impoverished the Israelites that the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. And verse 7, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet. Now, the prophet doesn't give them exactly what they hope for, but even in their worst scenario, when they only realize God because they're in a bad situation and are calling out to him, God still hears them. And God still responds to them. And so you are never in a situation where you are so far that God doesn't hear you and doesn't respond to you. However, isn't it better to not get to that point? If we can avoid it, if we see the warnings of Scripture and we see the warnings of others' lives, why would we go and test it ourselves? It's better for us to not have to get to the stage where we're so far gone that we cry out to God in our deep oppression. But if you are in that place, God hears you and he loves you, okay? So we're going to go to verses 7 through 10. It says, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all of your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose lands you live. But you have not listened to me. Now, if you go through the Old Testament, you'll see Israel mess up time and time again, and God shows up, and you know what God almost always says? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. He says that almost every single time. Why do you think God says that over and over and over again to the Israelites when they cry out to him after doing terrible things? To remind them, yeah. To remind them of what? Yeah, to remind them what he did. To remind them of his goodness. One of the things that I thought was really interesting in our little readings at the beginning was it said, and in this generation, no one remembered the Lord their gods or the things that he had done for them. Israel didn't get to this point because they remembered all the great things God did and they were just like, forget that, I don't care. They got to this point because slowly they started to forget the things that God had done. And this is something that I really hope that we as a church get right, is we as adults have a huge responsibility to tell the generations below us about the amazing things that God has done. Like, yes, tell them Bible stories. That is amazing. Do you know what they really need to hear? They need to hear the things that God has done in your life. It's funny because sometimes as adults we're almost like kind of hesitant to tell kids because we're like, oh, they don't care about my old stories. And the more you think, oh, the kids don't care about my old stories, they grow up and they go, well, God didn't really do anything that cool in my parents' life. And my life's perfectly fine. And before you know it, their kids, you know what they think about God? They don't. They don't think about God. God's just kind of an afterthought to them. And it's so important for us as the adult generation to be reminding people of the goodness of God and the things that he's done so that God doesn't have to show up later and say, do you know who I am? I'm the God who led you out of Egypt. God tells them this to remind them of who he is. Somebody has a Bible. Will they read Deuteronomy 4:9? I talked to Dr. Becker here about Bible drills earlier today, and so it's like in my mind, and I can't stop thinking about it. I'm like looking at you guys like, who's the fastest? All right, Dr. Harden's going to read for us. Here, let me bring a mic to you.
Deuteronomy 4:9. Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them slip from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them.
So all the way in Deuteronomy, God is reminding people, be careful not to let the things that you've seen slip from your mind. Be careful to remind your children of these things. This is something that God is telling the Israelites throughout the Old Testament. He wants them to remember. In fact, we've talked about this before, but God sets up all of these feasts for the Israelites. And he sets up things like Passover. And why do they do the same thing at Passover every single year? So that they remember what God did for them when he passed over them and freed them out of Egypt, right? He ends up setting up something called the Feast of Booths or Tents. You know why? To remind them of their time in the desert, right? In tents, as God was leading them to the promised land. And so God sets up these things for them so that they remember all the things that they were that they have gone through in the ways God has led them. And it's really important for us. That's why we do things like Easter every year. My dad and I were talking about it. My dad said, it's hard to preach an Easter sermon after you've done it for 21 years to the same church. You feel like they've heard your Easter sermon at this point, you know? And he said, but somebody told me something this week. He said, people don't show up on Easter because they're expecting to hear a new crazy sermon. They show up on Easter because they need to be reminded of the fact that the God of the universe loves them and rose from the dead for them. And so we do things like Easter and Christmas every single year. And it doesn't get old. And the reason is because it reminds us of the amazing things that God has done. And so God shows up and he says, I'm the God who led you out of Egypt. And he just wants to remind them of the things that they've forgotten and kind of put himself back in the proper place, right? All right, so we're going to be in verses 11 and 12. In comes our main character here, Gideon. All right. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now, this doesn't sound like a lot, maybe, from the beginning, but the way that you would have threshed wheat in ancient Israel was that you threshed wheat high up on a mountain, and you did it up on a raised platform. And you would take all of your wheat and you would place it on this platform, and then you would have some animals tread all over the wheat. And it would separate the wheat from the chaff, and you would put it up high up on the mountain so that the wind would come through and blow the chaff away. And then you would have your wheat. And so it was something that was not well hidden. And it says that Gideon is threshing wheat low on the hill in a wine press. And so Gideon, you would take the wheat up, but the grapes that you would harvest from the vines up on the hill, you would take down because they were heavy, and you would crush the grapes in a little wine press, right? And so this would have been also possible for you to thresh wheat in this, because you just put it in, you press it real quick. But it was not efficient, because you could only get small amounts. And so Gideon does the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. He doesn't take it up where everybody can see him. He's taking wheat down into the bottom of the hill in a little wine press, and he's putting just little amounts of wheat in and threshing it so that nobody can see him. So it's inefficient, but it's hidden. And so Gideon is kind of being a coward right here. He's hiding from the Midianites. Maybe coward, maybe he's smart, because they are kind of taking all their stuff, right? But he's threshing wheat at the bottom of the hill, scared, in a wine press, in an inefficient way. And then the angel of the Lord shows up and says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." And if you're Gideon, you've got to be like, dude, I'm literally hiding from some people at the bottom of a hill, doing the least efficient, like, not common sense way of threshing wheat just so that nobody sees me. And then the angel of the Lord shows up and says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Nothing makes you feel like a mighty warrior like hiding, right? And so we have this kind of weird situation. Gideon's hiding and afraid, and the angel of the Lord calls him a mighty warrior. Why do you think the angel of the Lord calls him a mighty warrior if he seems kind of cowardly here? Ooh, I like that. Yeah, because he sees Gideon's potential. Yeah, he sees what Gideon can become. But even more so, do you think that God sees what Gideon can do? You think that's really what God is concerned about, what Gideon can do? No. What's God concerned about? What God can do. And so God may, in reality, see a little scared boy threshing wheat at the bottom of the hill in a wine press, and know that Gideon is weak and scared, but God doesn't care about how weak and scared you are, because God knows how not scared and strong he is. And so I think it's really important for us, because I thought about this today, and I was like, man, Gideon's kind of a coward. Like, I don't know if we can relate to a coward like that. And this is not me calling any of you a coward, okay? So don't take it like that. But I was thinking about it, and I was like, Gideon's hiding from people who are oppressing his life and taking his things and killing his people. And we're ready to call him a coward. We live in America, in a place where we get to come to a 9 billion square foot church that we have. And we have fancy equipment where we record and stream online, and we get to talk about the Word of God openly. And then we are afraid to tell people about Jesus. We think actively, our theology is that if you don't have Jesus, you're going to hell. And we see people and we go, "Oh, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I don't want to make myself uncomfortable." And so I was so quick to say Gideon's a coward, where I'm not really like that. And then I was like, man, I don't know. I think God sees us, and we look a lot like Gideon threshing wheat at the bottom of a hill. And God sees you, and he says, "I'm with you, mighty warrior." And it's not because you're awesome. It's not like God looked at you and was like, you're so great and can do all these amazing things. God said, it doesn't matter what you can do. If I'm with you, you're okay. And so for Gideon in this moment, God is with him, and that's going to be enough, even if Gideon's a scared coward at the bottom of the hill. Now, verse 13 through 24, it says, "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alone." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid. You're not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day, it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. I did not say that right, but that's okay. Okay, so a lot just happened right there. So the angel of the Lord shows up. "Hello, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior." And Gideon's response, I think, is kind of funny. He says, "Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord's with us, why is all this going on in our life?" I think that's kind of a fair question, isn't it? You've probably asked that question before. You've probably, if you're really honest with God, you've been like, all right, they say God's good. They say he's got a good plan for me, but if he really does, why is this going on? Because this doesn't seem good, and this doesn't seem right. And Gideon has a fair point, I think. Gideon has questions, and it's legitimate. Maybe kind of scared, cowardly, unfaithful questions, but legitimate questions as he looks at his life. And I love God's answer. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Go in what strength? What strength did he tell Gideon to go in? In the strength you have. So does he say, Gideon, what we're going to do is we're going to train for 10 years, and we're going to make you like Spartacus, and you're going to be the greatest gladiator, warrior person that's ever lived, and then we'll go and we'll take care of the Midianites. He says, just go in the strength you have. So Gideon says, why, if you're with me, why is all this happening? He says, don't worry about that. Go like you are, weak, scared boy. We're going to conquer the Midianites. And I think this is so important for us to see, because once again, don't we ask questions like this? Wait, God, I feel like you told me. We'll make it like even simpler. God, I feel like you told me to go talk to that person, but I'm scared and I don't know the right things to say. And honestly, if you really wanted them to be saved, wouldn't you just do it yourself? And God's looking at you and he says, just go with what you got. I'm with you. But God, I'm trying to raise kids and I don't know how, and it's scary. And honestly, my parents were bad. What am I supposed to do? Don't worry about it. Go in the strength you have. That was not me. My parents were great. I saw y'all look at my dad. My parents did a good job, I think. You can be the judge of that. But he says, go in the strength you have. God, I feel like I'm being called to teach my Sunday school class. But I don't think I'm ready. God says, it's okay. You're not. Go in the strength you have. I'm with you. And I think it's just so important for us as a church. Like, yes, we train people. That's something that we really want to do. We're doing Bible studies right now because we want to learn and we want to grow and we want to know more so that we're more well equipped. But if God calls you, you don't get to say, God, are you sure about that? Are you sure about me? If God calls you, he's going to take care of you. If God calls you, he's with you. And if he's with you, it's not about you. It never was in the first place. It's about God. Just like I gave you the preface at the beginning, this story's not really about Gideon. Your story's not really about you. And the more we make ourselves less of the main character and make God more of the main character, the more we're able to kind of walk in the things that he's called us to. Yes, sir. That's great. That's great. So Gideon is told multiple times by God, just go. I'll be with you. And Gideon has one more request. If I have found favors in your eyes, give me a sign that it's really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you. And the Lord said, I will wait until you return. Now Gideon goes away, and he comes back, with food to offer to the Lord's angel. Now, does anybody feel like that's a little weird? Why is it weird? They're what? They're going to eat. What's going on in Israel right now? Nobody has any food. Nobody has any food. And did you see what Gideon comes back with? It says, Gideon comes back with a young goat, an ephah of flour, which is about 36 pounds of flour, that he makes bread without yeast, puts the meat in a basket, has broth in a pot. Gideon brings a feast to the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord says, sit it on the rock and pour out all the broth all over it. Basically, all right, toss it out there. Now, this seems like something I wanted to just skip over when I read it the first few times. But even though Gideon's weak, and even though Gideon seems to be making excuses and all these things, this is like a huge act of faith for Gideon. Gideon shows up with a lot to offer the Lord when they have nothing in Israel right now. And he lays it down before God, even though it seems weak in faith. And so this is going to be a big step for Gideon, and it's a big step for us as Christians as well to see that you can be really, really weak and have a lot of questions. But you know what God really requires of you is just your faith. It's your courage. And so Gideon has courage in this moment. It's still going to be layered with questions throughout the rest of the chapter. We'll see that in a second. It's not perfect, but it's faith and it's courage nonetheless. And so Jesus says, how much faith do we have to have? Faith of a mustard seed. And Gideon has at least a young goat and 36 pounds of flour worth of faith. So he's doing something pretty good here, right? So verse 25, it says, oh, no, wait, one more thing, sorry. Gideon puts all the offering on the rock. The angel touches the rock, and it says that all the food just disappears, and the angel disappears too. And Gideon says, alas, sovereign Lord. This sounds like almost like wow, God, that was cool. This is actually like Gideon screaming out in fear. It's kind of like you remember Isaiah's call when he sees God, and he says, woe am I, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I have seen God. This is kind of similar. He says, alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. What in Exodus, Moses says, if you see God, that you're supposed to die. And so Gideon's in this moment where he's probably feeling like, I'm about to die. This is not good. I just saw the terrifying God, and I had a conversation with him, and I asked him questions, and I kind of talked back to him a little bit. And then God says, peace. Do not be afraid. You're not going to die. And Gideon builds this altar, and he calls it, the Lord is peace. And so I think that this is something that's really important for us to understand too, is that as we are scared and as we have questions about God, and as we maybe take a second to really walk in faith with God, God still sees us and wants to offer us peace. God's not trying to punish us. He wants us to walk with him. He really, really wants that. And you can see the way that he's interacting with Gideon. He wants that. Don't worry about it, Gideon. I'll take care of you. Gideon asked all these questions. We're about to see more questions from Gideon. And God's really patient with him, okay? And because of that, God sees him as peace. So, verse 25 through 32, it says, that same night the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on top of this height. Using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. In the morning, when the people of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished with the Asherah pole beside it cut down, and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. They asked each other, who did this? When they carefully investigated, they were told, Gideon, son of Joash, did it. The people of the town demanded of Joash, bring your son, he must die, because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. So because Gideon broke down Baal's altar, they gave him the name Jerubbaal that day, saying, let Baal contend with him. Okay, so God issues Gideon a little test, I think. He says, okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to go and tear down the altar of Baal, tear down the Asherah poles, cut up the Asherah poles, make an altar, and then sacrifice the remaining bull to Yahweh. And so that's kind of a big deal, right? Because the people are worshiping Baal. He's afraid of all of them. And Gideon is scared. And once again, reasonably so. But Gideon goes at night, and he does exactly what God commanded him to do. And I think sometimes that God cares more about our obedience than our level of fear. You can be scared and go out and do the thing that God called you to do and do it anyways. And you know what? You were obedient. I think sometimes we think that we have to get to a situation, we have to get to this place where we're like, I'm not scared of anything. I'm fearless. In fact, I saw a thing with Gideon that was like, the title of it was Fearless, and it had a lion roaring. And I was like, that's not Gideon. Dude's scared halfway through his whole story. He's hiding at night right now. He was down by the wine press. But you know what Gideon is doing? He's being faithful and he's being obedient. And Gideon does it anyways. And so if you're thinking to yourself, man, I'm so scared. I am so scared. But you do what you feel like God's calling you to do anyways, you're being obedient. And that's wonderful. And I think that you'll find that the more that you take steps in obedience, despite your fear, the less scared you'll get. Because you'll start to see over and over again, man, God does it. He told me to do it, and he did it last time. Now I'm just doing it because I see all the good things that he does. But if you're at the place right now where you're going, this is scary, that's okay. That's totally fine. That does not make you a bad Christian or a bad person. You can still be perfectly obedient to God in your fear. And so Gideon does it, and the people wake up, and I thought this was funny. I was reading a commentary, and a theologian made a joke. He said, of course they saw it first thing in the morning because the people always made sure to do their devotion to Baal in the morning. That was just a dumb joke, right? That I thought was funny. I guess you guys didn't think it as funny as I was. But they see it first thing in the morning, and they go, well, who did this? And it's not a secret. Gideon tried to do it secretly, but everybody knows it was him. And so they go and get his dad. And it says that he was afraid of his dad. He was afraid of his family and the townspeople. And so the person that he's probably most afraid of is his dad, because it says, go tear down your dad's altars to Baal and Asherah. It doesn't say go tear down the town altars. It says go tear down your dad's altars. Gideon tore down his dad's altars. He already sacrificed one of his dad's young goats to the angel of the Lord. His dad probably doesn't know that yet. He just threw out 36 pounds of his dad's flour to the angel of the Lord. Now he's cut down all of his dad's altars and sacrificed his dad's last bull. So obviously his dad's going to be really mad, right? And the people show up and they say, give us your son so we can kill him. And somewhere along the way, we don't get information about why, but somewhere in this interaction, Joash, Gideon's dad, has a change of heart. And honestly, I would be willing to bet that it was because he saw his son's faithfulness to Yahweh, and it reminded him of what he should be doing. And so Joash ends up protecting him. If your God's so great, Baal, can't he protect himself? Do you need to protect Baal? And I love that they rename him, Let Baal Contend with Him. Right? His new name is basically, if Baal's so good, come and fight me. And he goes around living that legacy now. But sometimes your scared obedience is still obedience, and it affects the people around you. I have had so many stories of people from Master Life who have come up to me and said, man, I was so scared, and I decided to tell my neighbor about Jesus. And you know what's crazy? My husband saw me do it, and my husband went and told somebody about Jesus. And we realized it wasn't that hard, actually. We could do it. They're like, but I was so scared the whole time. Right? Your scared obedience will positively affect other people. Your scared obedience is still obedience. And so Gideon is putting that on display. And I think the other thing that's interesting is these altars to Baal, the whole point of let Baal contend with him if he's really a god is what? Baal doesn't exist. That's the whole point. Baal is nothing. And I think it's important for us to see, though, that sometimes you have to get rid of the altars that you've made in your life, the idols that you've made in your life, before you can really contend with your great things in your life. And so for Gideon, he has to get rid of Baal before he can contend with Midian. And for you, there are going to be things in your life. This is why we said it was like a test that God was giving Gideon. There's going to be things with you where God's going to have to kind of test you and say, will you get rid of those things in your life? They're getting in the way of me before you really step into your calling. Before you do the big thing, if Gideon said, "Nah, I'm not doing that," and walked away, do you think we would keep reading about him after this? That'd probably be the end of his story. And so if you've got things in your life that you're going, "Man, I feel like God's called me to something, but I know I have to get rid of these things first." My encouragement to you is, let the rest of your story be told. The only way you can do that is to get rid of those things that are standing in the way of you and God right now. Okay? And then last thing, verses 33 through 40. It says, "Now all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples joined forces and crossed over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Abizrites to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also into Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, so that they too went up to meet them. Gideon said to God, 'If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said.' And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, 'Do not be angry with me. Let me just make one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew.' That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew." So Gideon does this last little test for God, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to put this out on the ground. If it's wet in the morning and everything else is dry, you're really calling me." And so God makes it wet and everything else is dry. And Gideon goes, "Okay, my bad. One more time, do the opposite." He wakes up and it's dry. And so Gideon now really knows that it's God. Now, I want to make a clarifying statement. Just because God did this with Gideon, does that mean that that should be how we interact with God all the time? No, this is not an example of what we should do when God is calling us to something, right? I don't know if you've ever heard the old statement, "I'm laying a fleece out for God here." You heard that before? Yeah. "God, if you're really calling me, I'm laying a fleece out." You probably do things like this. I used to say things like, "God, if you're really calling me to ministry, make me pass a red car right now." And I'd open my eyes. It's like a 50-50 shot. There was a red car on the road, and I'm like, "Well, I guess you're not. Guess I'm going to be a business major." And it's so silly. And I honestly think Gideon's being silly here. And the point of this story is not, "Look what Gideon did. It was awesome. We should all lay out fleeces before God anytime he says anything." The point of this is God is really compassionate and patient with us. God is really compassionate and patient with Gideon when he called him to something. But, man, wouldn't it have been nice if Gideon said, "Okay, God, you called me, let's do it. You called me, let's do it." I wrote down at the end John 20:29. Does any of you know what that says? Without looking it up? I'd be really impressed if you do. It's random. But it says, "You believe because you've seen." Right? "But blessed is he who believes and has not seen." And so as we read this, God you might lay out a fleece and God might answer it. And that's great. But that's not the response that we're really hoping for. Right? What's really blessed is to be able to look back at all the things God's done. If we go back and we could have been like, "He's the God who set the Israelites out of Egypt. He's the God who saved me from my sin. He's the God who worked this wonder in my life. If he's called me to this, then I'm going to follow it. That should be the posture we're hoping for. However, if we do find ourselves in a laying out a fleece moment and God answers, the moral of the story is not do that every time. The moral of the story is, man, isn't God nice to me? Isn't God nice when I don't believe him? Wasn't it nice that God let me touch the holes in his hands? Right? And so Gideon receives some real good compassion from God here. And it's going to affect his life moving forward in a big way. And we're going to read about that next week, and what I think is a pretty cool story about Gideon. We get to get into all the war stuff next week, so it's fun. Okay. So let me pray real quick. Actually, are there any questions or comments before we end this? Yes, sir.
So to sum it up, the people of Israel didn't drive out the people of Luz, so they became losers. But the angel of the Lord cooked Gideon's dinner and gave him a due.
That's a good summation. Yeah, that's great. Fair enough. I like it. Yeah, it's like Christian Dr. Seuss book. It's good. Anybody else? You got to top that if you ask anything. All right, let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for stories about Gideon. We get to see his life and see ourselves in so much of it, see the places that we're not courageous and you call us to more. See the places where you're trying to call us and tell us, just go, I'm with you. Lord, help us to be faithful. Thank you that when we read stories about Gideon, they're not really about Gideon. They're about you. Help us to remember that as much as you love us and have created us for something special, our whole lives are really made to honor and serve you. Help us to live our life with you as the main character of it. To see you as the one who's really running things, who's really in charge, who it's all for. Lord, help us to be faithful when you call. So you know, we pray.